Good evening. Welcome to the Skirball Cultural Center. My name is Adele Lander-Burke. I'm the Vice President of Public Programs at the Skirball in Los Angeles. I am wearing a red and white striped sweater and I have white COVID hair. It didn't used to be this way, but that's what the way I look now. So you all know. The Skirball Cultural Center is guided by the Jewish value of welcoming the stranger. We seek to create cultural programs that work toward a more just society, one that is inclusive and welcoming to all who believe in the democratic ideals of freedom and equality. I am pleased that we are offering this conversation in observance of the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which is tomorrow. This annual observance promotes full and equal participation of persons with disabilities, urging us to take action for the inclusion of everyone in all aspects of society. This year's special theme is Building Back Better toward a disability inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. When I watched Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution on Netflix several months ago, I felt an immediate affinity to those featured in this film, mostly because I too felt that attending summer camp made a huge impact on my life. The story of how those who attended Camp Jened went on to achieve greater inclusivity for persons with disabilities deserves a wide audience. Therefore, tonight it is my pleasure to welcome co-directors of the film, Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht, to share their journey with us. Elana Naftalin-Kelman will moderate our conversation. She is the Director of Programs for Campers and Young Adults with Disabilities at Camp Ramah in California. With extensive experience in both the summer camp and disabilities world, she is well suited to guide our conversation. I want to thank everyone at Netflix for assisting to arrange for Nicole and Jim to appear with us this evening. And I also want to thank our interpreter, Kathy Markland, who is with us this evening. If you have not seen Crip Camp, I encourage you to watch it. You will be inspired by the story that they tell. Okay, so it is now my pleasure to turn the screen over to Elana, Nicole, and Jim. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Adele. It is really an honor and a privilege. I was so inspired when I first saw this film, and then when Adele reached out to me to have this conversation with you, Nicole and Jim, I couldn't say no. It's really an honor to be in conversation with you both this evening. So thank you for Skirball for having us all, and for Jim and Nicole for having us here as well. So I have so many questions, and it could go in a lot of different directions, but I wanted to start with a little bit of sort of bigger picture. I'm really interested in sort of your personal journey towards this film. Jim, I'm interested in a little bit about where the actual footage came from. I don't know if you took some of the footage, if there were other people. There's one scene in the movie where they show the film crew. I don't know if they were the ones responsible for all the footage, especially at a time when we weren't carrying, our own personal video cameras in our pockets like we do now. What was the inspiration behind making sure that this was all filmed and that you captured it all?
It's an incredible story. And first off, thank you for having us. My name is Jim LeBrecht. I'm an older white guy with a gray goatee, and my COVID hair is getting longer myself, and I've got a nice black shirt on with these little white things on it, and I got a red wall behind me with some movie posters. So the summer of 1979 at Camp Jened, it just happened to be that this group of hippie videographers, this collective called the People's Video Theater, happened to bump into a station wagon or a van full of folks from Camp Jened at a gas station close by. I think the gas station was in Catskill. The camp was in Hunter. And they said, "Hey, who are you guys with this video? Who are you guys with the wheelchairs and crutches?" And then before you know it, it's like, okay, well, we're this group and we have this new technology of portable black and white video. We love kind of using it as a tool for marginalized communities. They said, great, why don't you come to our camp? We're having the Camp Olympics in a couple of days. So so these folks showed up at the camp a couple of days later for the Camp Olympics, and I'm not giving away too many stories if you haven't seen the film, but the gates were locked. They couldn't get in. And as we were told by Howard and Ben, one of the members of the People's Video Theater, they dropped acid and hung it, well, as you would at that back in the day. And then when they got in, the whole place was upside down because two counselors had gotten the crabs. And so we were all quarantined into our bunks, had a shampoo with Quell shampoo. There were, sheets in the swimming pool. It was very, very much, everything's turned up cattywampus. I want to see the sign for cattywampus. And, and, and they started filming. So, and so finding this footage was not easy. But when Nicole and I first started talking about the film, I just had this kind of vague memory. I had this memory of these people being there, and they'd actually given me the camera one day. And all I remembered was the word "people" was in their name, and really it was a couple of months worth of sleuthing on Nicole's part when she finally got a connection to who these people were, and we made a connection.
It's really incredible footage, right, that you have. What a gift they gave you. And Nicole, I was reading a little bit about your work, and I read somewhere that your documentaries, right, you strive to have them inspire social change. And so it sounds like this People's Video Theater was sort of the preemptive, right, inspiring social change, leading to what you're doing and what you did with Crip Camp. And I'm interested into sort of how Crip Camp falls into that theme of your work.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I think that over time I've kind of moved as I've been making documentaries for about 25 years, and Jim's been my longtime sound designer and mixer, which is how we know each other. And over time, I would say that my films kind of, I began to make them kind of more and more in partnership with the communities or people that the films were about. And also really kind of like planning and thinking about the impact the films would have in the world while I was working on them, and kind of letting that inform some of how the teams are built and the storytelling evolves, So, I mean, one of my earliest films was called The Rape of Europa, and it was about the story of the Nazi war on European culture. And as we were making that film, my colleagues and I realized that, we were kind of at the cusp of a movement to really be able to pressure museums to make the provenance of their paintings available to people so that they could reclaim artwork that had been stolen from their families during World War II. And so we started, working with various people who were also in the film to try to impact that. I worked on a film about the deportation of Cambodian American, kids who had come here as refugees and then were suddenly eligible to be deported back to Cambodia after 9/11, and began to be involved in supporting the activism of some of the people in the film. And so I feel like with Crip Camp, I did see sort of this way to fuse so many things that I love, uncovering really important aspects of history by looking at them through a lens that's different, So there's this way that we were able, I think, to make people sort of see the story of that period of American history, that kind of revolutionary period, in a fresh new way through a story of that time that hadn't been told before, but also of a way to, by partnering with Jim as a co-director to tell the story, to really make a breakthrough film that is like a major historical film about a community that really, a community that's history is not well enough known and hasn't seen enough light, and isn't really has not really been kind of held up as being part of like the great civil rights stories that we tell ourselves about American history, from the perspective of the disability community, and to make the film in partnership with that community. So I was really excited. And then to find this trove of footage, it just seemed like there was, it was definitely like, meant to be, because the footage gives you the opportunity to actually have, as a viewer, an immersive experience of summer camp, and to go through a lot of what we tried to do was sort of engineer that the viewer would go through a lot of kind of steps on the emotional journey that a camper would have gone through when they entered the camp. And that was the gift that footage afforded to us.
I would say that you really did that, right? You really felt like you were at camp. I'm lucky that I get to be an adult who gets to go back to summer camp each year. And you really felt that as you were watching the film. I think it's so interesting that the film, that Nicole, what you said about working with the people who are actually in the film, right? Which is similar to how the community of Jenna is described, right? I think Judy Heumann says that even though we were young, we knew we were being sidelined, and we wanted to hear what everybody had to say. Right? They wanted to create a community where everybody's voices was heard, and you did that in this film, which I think is a lovely parallel of what the community was like then and what the film is like now. What do you think were the specific the power of being together in such an immersive experience of Gen Ed? How do you think, Jim, I guess that power then sort of propelled you forward to work towards the passage of the Rehab Act and ADA, and sort of the activism that was so present later on in people's lives who were at Gen Ed?
I think that I was so fortunate that Camp Gen Ed set the course of my life. I mean, I think a lot of us have very nostalgic feelings about summer camp, and maybe they got into theater or other things because of it. At the age of 15, I started feeling for the first time pride in myself and not shame, and a sense of community and understanding how to be in community with other people with disabilities. I was very fortunate that I did not go to, I went to public school, but meeting Judy Heumann, who you meet in our film, was critical to that. And Judy, who has been decades and decades a civil rights leader for disabled rights, that first summer, she just prevailed in this lawsuit. The New York City School District wouldn't give her a teaching position, even though she had qualified, and they gave some kind of excuse like, "Oh, you're a fire hazard," or whatever. And she prevailed in that suit. And for the first time in my life, I realized that we could fight back. That so many things in life felt unfair, simply because I couldn't walk, and that we had the ability to push back and win. And man, I felt like I was often running in regards to wanting to get involved and go down from Westchester County into Manhattan on the inaccessible train and start getting involved with Disabled in Action, the organizations she started. So I think that the other key is just simply a Camp Gen Ed, and Larry Allison talks about, is quoted in the film saying, the problem wasn't us, the able-bodied folks. The problem wasn't them, the disabled. It was us in our attitudes in society. And they just kind of simple. I want these kids to have a great summer. I want them to have the kind of summer experience every kid has. And being a product of the time, also the early 70s, the social upheaval, the anti-war movement, it was really at times where we were just looking at everything and deciding, let's just re-examine everything and throw out what's not working and try to have a new paradigm for how we treat each other.
Yeah, I think, it's so inspiring to hear you talk about that and to see it in the film. Certainly you can see it, right? They do. The way that the filmmaker, the original footage is taken about the conversations that are going on amongst the campers at Gen Ed, the conversations that are happening and how that works to inspire them to move forward in their activism is, inspiring to all of us. And what I would ask then is, how do we, I mean, if you had a transformative experience, you said it, Gen Ed set the course of your life, right? And so again, with my sort of camp director hat on, thinking about what do we want for those campers that are experiencing that now, and how do we do that?
Well, I think that's the same kind of advice that you give a parent of a child with a disability, is that don't be too overprotective. Let them experience life. The only way they're really going to find their way is to make mistakes. Obviously, you don't put anybody in danger. And despite what you might have seen or heard about Camp Gen Ed, we weren't in danger. Maybe the crabs, but that's not really dangerous.
I don't know, the wheelchairs in the back of the truck, that seemed dangerous to me too.
Okay, there's that too. And, yeah, I did some things in college that were kind of crazy for a wheelchair user.
Fair enough.
Okay. But I think that as people at camp, it's I think kids want to be there just to be kids for the summer.
Yeah.
Certainly there's considerations one always has to make, but don't infantilize.
Yeah.
And I think that my sense from other, especially if you have a camp that's disabled and non-disabled, kids become kids. They become friends. They form their cliques and their packs, and just nurture it. And I truly believe that it'll happen.
I wonder though if there isn't some way to kind of capture that that spirit of the time that Jim was talking about earlier, that spirit that like we can create a new world. I feel like that's the kind of infectious thing that that when some of the scenes that we didn't include in the film that the People's Video Theater filmed showed the staff meetings, and I wished we could have put them in the film because it was incredible to see the care with which everything was discussed and debated, and people were so passionate. Would this video crew be a helpful thing or would it be a harmful thing in terms of building community? And everything was about people being treated equally, people being heard, people being respected, and people feeling like they were a member of the community. And I think that intentionality, but also the kind of like utopian spirit and the belief that actually doing that would make a difference was something that was really special there. I mean, Denise Jacobson, who's in the film, talked about how Larry would always give the campers a chance to complain about anything that was bothering them. And she said, usually at the end he would then roll his eyes and go like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything about that. But like, but I think that they appreciated both things. They appreciated that he listened and understood and cared about what they had to say, but also that he would joke around with them, and that he was salty, and that he was sort of, treating. Well, you can hear Jim, sassing back to Larry in the footage in the film, and so just that opportunity to kind of have that type of open relationship with an adult who is extraordinary too. And I think what we were hoping to show was that that kind of profound experience of forming community in such a atmosphere of liberation is like not just kind of like something that would help a social movement grow, but it's something that would genuinely be like a must have, for the kind of belief that a better world could be created, and that Jim or Nancy Rosenblum or whomever, had a role to play in that.
As we talk about, I just remember the irreverence at camp, and and that's important, and it's kind of like, I remember my final summer, I worked in the kitchen, so I had my car up there, and wish I hadn't. And Larry needed to get somewhere, and he said, "Now be careful, you guys don't know how to drive," and it's just like, and But I think that when you were willing to kind of razz somebody and joke with them, that you're not being mean or anything. You're saying, I know you can take it. I know we're all good. And it's especially like as a young guy to hear that from, you know, a 20-year-old versus a 15-year-old, they're accepting me.
Yeah, I mean, that was very clear, right? That it was just a place of complete acceptance for everybody that was there. Nicole, I was also interested in the staff, right? In my role, I work with staff and campers, and I was also interested in the staff piece and wanted to hear more of that story. So it's interesting to say that that was sort of left on the cutting room floor. I'm also interested, were there other sort of themes or scenes that were left on the cutting room floor that you wish you could have kept in or chose to leave out for whatever reason?
Yeah, I mean, there's always heartbreaks when you're editing, you know. And with this film, there was nothing that I didn't just love, you know. I really, one thing was some of the backstories. You know, we weren't sure whose childhood backstory, you know, would be the most important and when we would reveal it. And we ended up, you know, focusing a lot on Judy Heumann's backstory, and coming to it fairly late, actually, in the film, about 15 minutes in, so that Judy would seem like representative of all the campers, but it would be clear that it was a group story and a movement story, and it wouldn't feel like it was the Judy Heumann story, you know. She kind of comes up in through that lasagna meeting as part of the staff, but we had these beautiful backstories, more about Jim's childhood, about Denise Jacobson's childhood, you know, living on the second floor of an apartment building in the Bronx, and you know, that she had to struggle mightily to get up, so she really was pretty much stuck in her apartment there, and her feelings of isolation and how that changed when she got to Jeanette. And those were some of the things that were painful for me to lose, along with that incredible scene, Jim, of you and Judy at the Berkeley Rep.
Yeah. There's as we're talking today, let me see if I can find a link on YouTube. Netflix had a video that they made of on the cutting room floor, basically. So there's 2 scenes in there that are, and I'll post it into the chat in a minute or two, unless it all of a sudden appears by some magic in the background.
Jim, I'm interested in this in your identity as it was shaped at Gen Ed. You mentioned briefly at bits and pieces, and then as we were chatting before this started, you had also said that there's a story about a group coming to teach you how to dance Hava Nagila, and I'm interested in hearing that. That as sort of it plays into the experiences that you had at Gen Ed in forming your identity.
Yeah, I haven't really had a chance to tell this story, but there was a wonderful Jewish camp very close by, Camp Abelard, and you know we would do things occasionally. They'd come over and we'd have wheelchair basketball games or such, and they decided it'd be a really good idea to come over and teach us how to do the horror. So imagine we're in the big, you know, that big kind of dining hall, and we're all in a circle, and you've got a counselor behind each wheelchair pushing the wheelchair. And so you kind of go forward and then you stop, and then you go forward and you stop. Not everybody stopped at the same time. So the foot plates of the wheelchair behind would often bash into the back of the ankles of the counselor in front of them. And the next day was like the walking wounded. People were just limping all over camp.
Sounds like an unusual horror for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, it was that kind of place where, you know, it wasn't like a closed set. It wasn't like, people came in. We had bands come in, you know, and perform for us. And you know, one of our counselors, this incredible folk person in the folk scene, Bunky Skinner, you know, and who, if you knew the Greenwich Village, you know, folk scene, she was an important person back then. So, well, it makes me really happy to talk about this tonight. Thank you.
Well, I'm really happy to hear about it tonight. So thank you. This is, you know, a lot of the movie, the footage of Gen Ed really lays the foundation for, you know, the rest of the story about this this group of activists that was born from their experience at Gen Ed. And I'm interested in sort of hearing from both of you what you think of the sort of disability activism movement today. Where do we think, you know, we've come so far and almost not so far from where we were then. You know, there's this really telling scene where Judy's like, I need to stop applauding every time I can get into a bathroom, right? That's a really telling scene. And I would say that disability activists are probably saying the same thing today. And I'm just interested to hear sort of from both of you about that movement, right? That was Gen Ed, it was born of Gen Ed. And where do we need to go now?
I mean, Jeanette was definitely a major kind of starting point, but there were many. This was happening in other places in the country, and as things like the fight for the 504 happened, you know, organizations were coming together, and we see this in our film. And in fact, you know, not everybody really wanted to work together. I think there was a desperation, maybe, on some people's part, like, can you at least do it for the blind, or, you know, make these accommodations? And so, coming together of all these groups, especially around the signing of the 504 regulations, was extremely important. And today, the fight just kind of continues on. You know, access to healthcare, high unemployment, COVID all of a sudden just heightens everything, especially when you have that fearful discussion about healthcare rationing. And they're very, very early on in the pandemic, they said, well, we should really look at quality of life as if we have to make choices. And you had people assuming that if you had a disability, you had a poor quality of life. I mean, people literally had to go to court to get these regulations struck down. And the last person I think that really understand, well, anyway, you know, I mean, people think they know and they don't know. They just really don't know. And I think that maybe one of the things about our film is that I think people get a better sense of disability, what it's like to live with one, but kind of who we are. And there was a moment I came into the editing room one day and Nicole had been working and I watched the scene and I said, well, finally, maybe they'll understand. And to me, that was a huge moment, just in that this is what we've needed. But, and Nicole, maybe do you want to talk about the disability justice movement?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that's been really gratifying over the last pandemic time has been that we have been able to work with these two really incredible women leaders in the disability justice movement, Andrea Levant and Stacey Park Milburn, who unfortunately passed away. And both of them just brilliant young leaders of color in disability justice, which is kind of an evolution of disability rights. That's really saying we need to prioritize the leadership and the voices of people of color and queer people within the disability rights movement, within the disability community, people who have actually been marginalized within that earlier movement. And that, you know, sort of idea of the leadership of the most impacted. And of course, you know, doing that successfully, having a movement like that really requires kind of like almost another level of that same core value set that we found so moving within the 504 building during the sit-in, and just even around that table at Camp Gen Ed, that kind of thing of like, okay, I don't have your disability or the other intersecting oppressions that you're dealing with, you know, but I know that you're the expert on that, and I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to see you, and I'm going to listen to you, you know. And so and it's amazing, you know, as we all know, like this generation is, you know, so far from where my generation was, or even, you know, people in the Gen Ed era, really, in terms of kind of really understanding intersectionality in that way. And so it's been very exciting to be able to kind of have our Crip Camp impact campaign as part of this growing disability justice movement, which is kind of almost even expanding globally because of the internet and people's ability to kind of come together and create community online. But to have it be so connected to that kind of like core value set that we wanted to celebrate in the film.
I'm wondering if, you know, you say that you know, it Crip Camp plays such an important part in the disability justice movement now, and it's sort of growing as an inspiration for activists out there. And I'm wondering if, when you were originally thinking about the film or in the process of making it, did you want it to tell a story, or did you want it to inspire political activism, or both maybe?
Both. I mean, I think you can't, I think a film often does not inspire political activism very well if it's not a real emotional, compelling story.
Yeah.
And we had to do a lot to get people to experience this movement and its history in such a kind of like immediate, immersive way. And the first thing we had to do, as Jim was saying, is shift people's perceptions of people with disabilities. And that's what the camp gave us the opportunity to do. So that, you know, if you're a non-disabled viewer and you're not comfortable with disability or familiar with the community, you can come into the camp, you can feel a little uncomfortable, you can be a little bit unsure how you might relate to this or that. And then you can realize that that's just silly, and you can start to enjoy everybody, and you can, you know, feel like you're a part of the community. And then you see the history in a different way. And I think it was enabling people to see it so personally that I think enabled them also to make connections between how the characters in the film were feeling and how they were feeling about, you know, the racial justice movement that happened this summer, or how they were feeling about healthcare disparities that were happening, you know, disproportionately in communities of color because of the pandemic, and all these things that we've all been living through. I feel like people have had very personal connections to what they see in the film and how they feel about, you know, getting out in the street now, or organizing now, or being involved right now.
It's been remarkable to kind of read once in a while a review that might say, if you want to get a better sense of what activism in the streets looks like, watch Crip Camp. I mean, we're a bunch of disabled people, right? I mean, aren't we the people that are kind of, you know, helpless? Well, you know, Manhattan paid the price. If you see the one scene where we just blocked one intersection. By the way, I'm going to put the link to the deleted scenes into the chat here for people.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
I'll definitely watch them. You know, I think it's so interesting that again, I see this parallel between, Jim, your experience at Gen Ed, where I think you say at one point, I can't remember the actual quote, but at one point you say, like, it was so empowering to be around people who were like you for the first time in your life. You really had to stop sort of excusing your disability and start embracing it. I'm not sure if that's the exact language, but something like that. And so it sounds like the parallel experience between, Jim, your experience at Gen Ed, and Nicole, your desire for the movie, or both of you, the desire for the movie to make those changes in the viewers, which I think is so telling, that you tell the story so well and make those changes in the viewers. And I'm wondering, before we switch to the Q&A portion, just sort of like, what are you hoping from the viewers? They walk out of the film thinking what? They walk out of the film changed in what way? What are you hoping for? Either of you.
That you have conversations.
Mm.
That you tell your neighbor, I saw this film and my perceptions around disability were blown away. And, you know, it's a joyous film. There's humor in it. There's intrigue. There's danger. But that if we could start these conversations with people to reconsider how they've stigmatized people with disabilities, we would really go a long way. I mean, literally, right out of Sundance, there was a screening for some local politicos, and we heard that they had basically one county commissioner said, we have to take another look at our transportation program, because they wondered whether they were doing a good enough job. Mm-hmm. And so start conversations.
Yeah. I love that. Right.
I also wanted to make the tent bigger. You know, we wanted people who might have hidden disabilities or may not see the value in identifying with disability community, or even maybe really know there is a disability community or a disability culture, to get excited about it, you know, and feel proud of it and claim it and seek it out, learn about it, you know. So we did this whole kind of virtual summer camp experience all summer long, and we had 10,000 people from all over the world come and join in, you know. And people are making connections, and there's splinter Facebook groups, and quite a number of people are kind of coming into the community for the first time. So that was another thing we wanted to do, and also just to give like young people with disabilities that sense of being part of a community that, you know, is badass and incredible and changed the world, you know, really did. Like we used to put, and when we were fundraising for the film, we would say like, you know, it's a story that started at a summer camp and it changed the world. And people would kind of go, oh, roll their eyes when they read Change the World. But I'm like, it literally did. I mean, you literally go to any country around the world and you see a curb cut, and that is, you know, these folks. So that's just always, I never stop being blown away by that.
I mean, I think that's what I came away with both of you, right? Wanting to talk about it, telling everybody I knew to watch it, and also to I think, Nicole, what you said about, you know, making the tent bigger and making sure that everybody's voice is heard, and that everybody, and that this really did change the world. It's really magical.
You know what I would love? I would love that the next time somebody's in the car and they decide they're going to park in that handicap spot just for 1 minute, that you go, don't move it. You have no idea what people did and what they went through, so that this opportunity to live in society is available to them. I had a friend just do this to me the other day, you know, and it was like, you know, he said, no, we're not even talking. You move out of that spot. I don't care if it's an empty parking lot. It's the principle of the thing.
You know, I really believe that this film can make those changes, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, it is a lot bigger than people parking in handicap spots, but I think the principle is what you get from me.
Definitely. So there are a few questions in the Q&A that I'm going to read out. And super interesting questions that some of the folks watching have written. So one person wrote, I've been showing a play on Judy Heumann and Section 504 sit-in strike in my class for several years. And then to find your documentary this past year about the background history of those people having been together earlier, Crip Camp was incredible. In all caps, incredible. So her question is, the queer, i.e. non-normative sexuality dimensions of the film is what me and my students found so profound and moving. How did you navigate that topic so insightfully, and what were some challenges that came up?
That is a good question that we have not gotten before. I mean, I would say, you know, I mean, for us, it was like this very beautiful kind of organic thing, especially like Steve Hoffman's character, you know, and being able to kind of follow the evolution of that and show this incredible striptease performance that he does, and not even comment on it. You know, we really wanted to get to that place with it where it would be clear that coming out to California and being part of, you know, the gay rights movement, everything that was going on at that time in San Francisco, was just a, you know, really integrated with and really aligned with everything that was going on at the Center for Independent Living and the spirit of the disability rights movement of that time. And also that, like, that a community that's founded on acceptance would just support all of these flowerings, you know, all of this diversity. And then, you know, to be able to sort of discover through the footage, which we didn't even know when we started out because Steve had passed away. So we're like looking in the old archival footage, and we're seeing footage of there's Steve, you know, at a pride parade, you know, that happened like a few weeks before the sit-in. And then there's Steve again, you know, coming out of the building. And there's the Butterfly Brigade, you know, in the Castro, sneaking in walkie-talkies this was another detail that was on the cutting room floor that just pained me. But they literally like figured out a way to get a whole bunch of walkie-talkies and like sneak them into the building, you know, so people could communicate with people outside in addition to the signing. So all, you know, I think, I don't know, I feel like it wasn't so much that, you know, we did such a great job maybe of interweaving that organically. It's just that it was so organically interwoven, but it was certainly something that we really, really wanted to just like feel like it was a really critical piece of the whole story.
There was some wonderful footage we saw of Ron Washington, who was gay, and it was just really lovely, and didn't want to find a place in the film, but it's like, yeah, I love what you said, Nicole. I mean, I just think that it wasn't a challenge, maybe as much as it was just natural, just showing people's lives. Would you agree with that, or I don't know?
Yeah, yeah, I would. I mean, we had, it's funny, you know, we initially thought about just having all the characters only be people from Camp Jened and telling this history kind of completely through the eyes of this one community. And then we did discover that there were perspectives that we really needed to include. And we started thinking of the kind of telling of the story as being kind of like told in this way that kind of grew and expanded. And at the same time, the characters were kind of evolving. But then you know, you bring in Corbett O'Toole, you know, and then you get her perspective, and then you find this incredible piece of archival footage where she's sitting there singing "Yay for gay children, we shall not be moved," you know. Like, are you kidding me? You know, I was like, rewind that, did she really say that, you know? But they're just like, that's what I mean. It was like just this gift of that period. So then, yeah, then we were able to also include the perspective of Dennis Billups, you know, the blind African-American activist who played such a pivotal role in the Washington, D.C. activism, and also Holland DeLille, who was gave that perspective of somebody who had a newly acquired disability. And so, you know, it was funny. We used to say it's like it's almost like one of those movies where people get on a bus and head out to California to put on a show or something. You know, like the community just keeps growing as it's rolling out west. So that was how we started to think about it, instead of just being this all about Camp Jened.
I do think that shows to the inclusivity, the big tent, right? And that you were including everybody's stories, no matter where they were from or what they were doing or who they were as a person. And I think that's really telling from the movie. So another question from the audience is that someone says that I noticed that caregivers and parents were discussed but weren't in the film. I think that was a great thing, that it was the individuals that was focused on enough in themselves as human beings. Was that a conscious decision, or did that just happen? Many times in my experience working with people with disabilities, people talk to the caregiver as if the individual isn't there.
This is one of the things I thought was brilliant about what I loved about the People's Video Theater. They could have easily come in and said to the camp director, "Tell us how you're taking care of these handicapped children," you know? They like came in and said, "Hey, we're here, help us make a film." To get agency like that as a disabled person, especially back at that time, was really, really quite rare.
For the non-disabled people who are in the film, we kind of decided they had to have a status of being like on the journey with the disabled people in the film as allies, you know? So if you notice, like when the counselors are speaking, they're not necessarily, you know, with rare exception, they're not talking about the campers, you know? Every time we tried to do that, it ruined everything, you know? They're basically sharing their own journey, you know? Which was an interwoven part of the journey of the campers. And same with Evan White, you know, the news cameraman who accompanies everyone to Washington. You know, for a while we were like, well, we don't want to put him in there because he's a news cameraman. But then, you know, his personal connection to the story and the meaning it had for him and his own life, and the love and kind of reverence that the community had for the role he played, you know, made it work. But we definitely didn't want to have people opining who were not the actual kind of instigators of the history.
I love that. It added such a richness to the film, right? And again, showed really the story. Someone else wants to know if there were blind or legally blind campers at Gen Ed.
Oh yeah. Kind of early in the film, you see Carl, who says, he and in fact he gives out his telephone number.
Oh yes.
That's Carl. And
my kids wanted to call it when we were watching.
Well, funny thing, we had to go back and change the film a little bit after it went out. Carl's still alive, and that was still his phone number. And just in deference to him, we kind of had to do a little audio fix where we kind of muffled a couple of the digits. But yeah, we started seeing it online. I just talked to Carl.
That's funny.
Oh my gosh. And the really wonderful thing is, I don't think you'd mind this at all. There's some beautiful color footage of a trip. I think it was to Lake George, and you see Carl and Ellie in the background briefly, and she's walking with them. And Carl's got this big kind of what looks like a bunch of newspapers with him. It's a Braille edition of Playboy. So apparently the man that read Playboy for the articles.
I love that. Someone asked about some people could be offended by the title, although it speaks to the spirit of the film, and wondering if you got any pushback on it being not sort of in quotes PC.
We've gotten feedback for sure about the title. Everything from kind of confusion. People thought it was going to be about the gang, to some disabled people who are really uncomfortable with the use of the term, which we totally understand. And we also knew that, not everyone, like in popular culture, not everyone is familiar with the idea that's a term that's been reclaimed, by some people in the disability community. Well, Jim, you can do a better job than I of explaining why we felt it was really important.
Yeah, well, first off, I remember I've been friends with Corbett O'Toole in the film for a long time. And I remember the first time she said to me, "Did you go to Crip Camp?" And it was, "Oh, yeah." And, it's shorthand. It was, "Did you go to a summer camp for people in wheelchairs?" But for me, it is that reclaiming of the word that is a political statement. And it kind of says about you if you use that, and a non-disabled person shouldn't be using this word, but within the community, that if you are, it's an indication you identify culturally and with pride with your disability, and that some part of you is really very politically aware about what it means to have a disability. And for me, it is a shortcut, because those blue zones, it's like if my wife Sarah and I are going to places, well, let's go, the Crip parking is a little bit better at that shopping mall, so why don't we go there? So it's a little handy too.
It also is super important for us to have a title that telegraphed to the world. Like, I think Crip Camp does two things that were really important for our title. One, it had to be like edgy, because people just basically assume any film about disability is going to be like tragic or inspirational, and literally, like, we would be pitching the film and Jim would say, "Well, it's about a summer camp I went to in the 70s," and people would go, "Oh," and Jim's like, no, this was not that kind of camp. So we needed a title with some edge, because we needed people to believe that the film was going to have an edge, and be something different. And also we needed a title that would telegraph that this was a story, not, looking at the community, but from within the community. And it was very hard to find another title that did that, plus had like a dash of irreverent humor.
I think the title is brilliant. Someone's asking about the Obama's involvement and how did that come about?
You want to tell that story?
I always like the way you tell it personally, but if you don't mind, I mean, you got to understand, we've done 50 of these, and
Sure.
I just sit here, I just I just love the way you talk about stuff, Nicole.
Well, thank God that you do.
I mean,
I mean,
maybe I'm easy. I don't know.
it was an incredible, I think that to a certain extent, especially because of the pandemic, the whole thing feels, still does feel very surreal to us. But we worked with this incredible executive producer named Howard Gertler, and he read about the Obamas setting up their production company Higher Ground in partnership with Netflix. And he immediately thought, we have to get our film in front of him. At that point, we just had a fundraising trailer. And but he said, Judy Heumann worked in the Obama State Department, and there's so many kind of aligned values here around grassroots organizing and the power of young people to change the world and things that they care about. And so we were able to get a fundraising trailer to Priya Swaminathan, who had just been hired to run Higher Ground. And she called us up and said, like, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't stop watching this trailer. And my bosses feel the same way, which Jim and I are like, trying to sound cool, but inwardly screaming. And then she flew up to Berkeley and spent a bunch of time with us looking at our footage and talking about the project and why did we want to make it. And it was interesting because they were sort of at a moment where they were trying to figure out what was the mission statement of their company and what kinds of films did they want to support. And they ended up saying to us later that this project helped them to kind of define that, which was really amazing. And she said something to us that made us convinced that we had to try to work with them, which was, you have a culture changing project. And that's what we wanted to have. And they have just been incredible partners. They really have. Higher Ground, Priya and Tonya were amazing producers, but also the President and Mrs. Obama watched 3 cuts of the documentary and gave, presidential notes, which was an amazing experience too. It's just like a kind of a perspective and a worldview that we feel so honored and lucky to have had.
That's really an amazing story, right? And it sounds like they were the perfect fit for the story you wanted to tell, that their production company really was the perfect fit for that. So we'll take one more question. One of that is, so the last one is, how many years did the camp exist? And do you know anything about how camps for the disabled have continued to thrive to today?
Camp Jaded, started out well before it was a camp for the folks with disabilities as a Jewish camp. And in the 50s, Honora and her sister started this as a camp for folks with disabilities. The kind of the directorship and who was running it changed over the years. But if you go back to the early 50s, the last summer of Camp Jaded was 1977. And as it was, there was another organization that kind of tried to kind of run it for a while, and that only lasted a while, and it was really a different group of people. But nowadays, we hear stories about some camps that sound pretty similar. Maybe one in Santa Cruz, Lord knows, and but there's also there's like these film camps. There's like this one Camp Jabberwocky that is on Martha's Vineyard, and there's another one in Vermont called Zeno Mountain Farm, and they've been making fantastic films. They have a film called Becoming Bulletproof that came out a couple of years ago.
I've watched that. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then and their latest film was supposed to premiere South by Southwest, and then the pandemic hit. But it's called Best Summer Ever. It's a musical, and it's kind of like this teenage love story and intrigue and backstabbing and all of this. And I know the filmmaker, so I got to see a cut of the film. And it's great. I just can't. I'm dying for someone to release this film, and because it is so wonderful on so many different levels, and the talent there is just amazing. So, yeah.
Terrific. So I'll end with one question with my camp director's hat on, which is to say that, I was so inspired by the story that you told of Gen Ed and the power that it could have to change people's lives. And I am a big believer in the summer camp immersive experience. It's what I do for a living. And to see it in film was really powerful for me as a professional in the field. And I'm interested in sort of what would you say to parents and to parents either who are interested in sending their kids to these immersive experiences and the power of that, and to kids who are going and how to use it to sort of inspire them to do more with it, to continue to be activists in their lives.
There's a number of youth organizations, like in the Bay Area. We actually, one of our first filmings was with Judy and a group called Yo Disabled and Proud. And so outside of camps, there are other organizations that are really kind of teaching community and activism on that level. So I wish I knew a lot more about it, to be honest with you.
I think it was funny. I was working on the film and I met this guy in an airport in Switzerland who's a professor of adolescent health and psychology at Berkeley. And I told him about this and he got excited and he bicycled over and watched a bunch of footage, because he said that, his research indicates that going to a camp like this and having mentors and that are not that much older than you, but people who, and having a strong sense of, shared values and a sense of community like this is, I think he said, it's like the single kind of strongest predictor of future health and happiness. Which kind of blew my mind. And he was like, wow, you actually have like the campers then and now. So you can actually show, 50 years later, how much that's still, playing a role and making people kind of healthy and happy and still kind of believing that they have agency to try to make the world a better place. So, for me, my husband had always gone to a month-long camp in the San Juan Islands that his father went to, which was very important to him. And I did not want to send my teenage sons away for a month. I thought it was because on the West Coast, we don't really have that East Coast month-long summer camp tradition. And I didn't really understand it. And lucky for my son, working on this film completely changed my mind. And he went, and it's become this huge, huge part, of his own sense of identity and happiness. So I would say to parents to embrace these places. It's so precious. And so just to see it through the making of this film and then to see it in my own son's life was really, really moving. And I'm a believer.
Laid, as it were. I would say the same. So I'll just say that I'm honored to be in conversation with both of you this evening, and honored to hear more stories about Gen Ed and about Crip Camp. And certainly inspiring for me as a mother and as a professional in the camping field to think about how we can use the power of these immersive experiences to go and inspire the next generation. So thank you.
You too.
I want to thank all of you. This has been a fantastic conversation, and the questions from the audience were just terrific. I'm going to go watch the film yet again. I'm so motivated to really want to because it immerses me back in summer camp as well. So I really thank you for all of your hard work. Elana, you asked really great questions. Thank you. And just a shout out, she runs a really incredible program at Camp Ramah, California for kids with disabilities. So take a look at that one. Nicole and Jim, really, I wish you the best of luck in continuing to promote the film. Live More and Jenna Herman at Netflix, I want to thank you very much for your support in making this happen. And Kathy Marklin, you've done a terrific job of being our interpreter for the evening. So I want to thank all of you. Just to remind you, this program will be on our YouTube channel. You're welcome to share it. And just also to let you know that right now, I believe the only place to see this film is on Netflix. So go to Netflix. Netflix, is that not correct, Jim? There are other places?
Stealthily, it's available on YouTube at the moment.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but okay.
We don't know when it's going to be pulled, but
Okay.
to give educators a chance to
Great.
get access, they did a beautiful thing.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So look for it on YouTube as well. All right, everybody have a good evening, and thank you all again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy.